What's up, guys? This is Keegan Russell, host of the Sports Authority Gurus podcast. I'm excited to get back on the mic again today. We took the last couple weeks off from the show, had some scheduling conflicts in the background with getting some guests on and getting some shows recorded. We also decided to take a couple weeks off since both KU football and the Chiefs were on bye weeks, and that KU basketball hadn't started yet. But we are back again today. I'm going to be riding solo, just myself today. I want to get you prepared for the KU basketball season. Before we get into that, just a couple things to catch you up on. And we'll get into this in an episode later in the week, but your Kansas Jayhawks football team did finally get that 6th win this last weekend to make them bowl eligible, which is super exciting because that's the first time since 2008 our program can say that we are bowl eligible. Obviously, that does not guarantee us a bowl game yet, as we'll get into in the episode later in the week, but that does put us in a prime position to be in a bowl game at the end of the season. On top of that, the Chiefs came off a bye, and they just beat the Tennessee Titans last night in what was an awful game for most of 3 quarters. Chiefs finally pulled it back out in the late 4th quarter to get a victory. So Chiefs are entering the final stretch of the season after the bye, looking to push towards that 1 seed. And then that brings us to KU basketball. And before we do that, a couple other things to mention. If you've been paying attention, we've been talking about some things going on behind the scenes that we're working on. And we're not quite ready to do that just yet to formally announce it, but I'm going to kind of give you a sneak peek right now. We've been working on doing some rebranding of our podcast just to kind of specialize in what we enjoy talking about and kind of update some of our marketing and promotional stuff so that it ties in directly to who we are as a podcast group and to what our listeners want. So that is coming. Hopefully in the next 1 or 2 episodes, you will see us formally launch our rebrand. So new logo, a little bit different name for the podcast, and some updated marketing content. So really excited for that. Spencer, my other co-host that you haven't heard for a while, he's been working diligently on the rebrand for several weeks now, and we are pretty close to launching it. So stay tuned for that. That will affect some of our social media accounts. We're going to be changing our name on a couple of our platforms. But don't worry, we'll catch you up on all that, and we will make sure that everyone knows the links to those and everything is updated. So, with that, let's talk some KU basketball. The season has officially started. We had an exhibition game the other night, and at the time of this recording, this is Monday the 7th, so KU has its first game of the active season tonight, November 7th, Monday night at home against Nebraska Omaha. If you are going to the game or you're still trying to get tickets, do so because every fan in attendance will get a piece of the national championship floor. So that's pretty exciting. And you get to kick off the season to see your defending national champs, the KU men's basketball program, tip off the 22-23 season. A couple of headlines I want to start with as we look towards the season. Obviously, the biggest thing in the last couple of weeks you've probably heard is the suspensions, the self-imposed suspensions that the university laid out for Bill Self and Curtis Townsend. We're not going to spend too much time talking about it. This is just some preliminary stuff that we've been working on as a program to kind of prevent any other potential backfiring coming down from the IARP investigation, which has taken like 7 years and produced nothing. In the same time as well, Louisville finally got their hearing back, and it was very minimal. So this is just KU being a little proactive, just showing that they're willing to kind of buy into some of the punishment stuff that might need to happen. So the details of this, Bill Self and Curtis Townsend will be suspended the first 4 games of the season. Really what that means is they won't be there on game days. They'll still be able to practice and help game plan, but they will not be at the first 4 games. So that means assistant coach Norm Roberts will take over as the acting coach for the first 4 games of the season, which leads us in the first 2 weeks of the season. Not really much to think about there. I don't think it's going to impact the games too much. I think KU's going to struggle early on anyway, trying to find an identity. But I think the way Norm Roberts is going to coach is going to be pretty similar to what we see with Bill Self. So I don't think there's too much to worry about there. Just a couple games. Just, again, being proactive. Some of the other things, though, a part of that suspension and some of the voluntary stuff that KU's doing to get back in good graces, they're limiting themselves to a handful of visits in person each year, as well as losing a scholarship over each of the next 3 seasons. So I don't think, again, it's going to have a huge impact on everything moving forward. It's really more of a short-term step back for long-term protection. Um, but it just means we might be a little shorthanded on the recruiting side for the next couple of years. But I think Bill Self does a tremendous job recruiting and developing anyway. That shouldn't be an issue. So that means Bill Self, luckily, gets to be back for the Battle for Atlantis tournament down in Bahamas. So lucky for him, he gets to take a few days off at the beginning of the season, but doesn't have to miss that Bahamas trip. I'm sure that was very strategically timed. That's the main headline that I want to talk about as we transition to the team itself. I want to go through lineup projections, season expectations, um, kind of go through the roster and give you a little bit of what I think is going to happen minutes wise. I think, this team is positioned to have some of the most depth Self has ever had, but also some of the most question marks as far as who has what role, how many minutes they're going to play, and all that. So let's kind of get into it. Lineup projections here. If you listen to our first KU basketball episode a few months ago after the championship, we took a very deep dive into the roster, and I'm going to start there. So we're going to go back a few months here. At that time with Spencer and JB on, we talked about the guys returning. We talked about the incoming freshmen, and we put together some potential lineups. Not much in our projections has really changed outside of the starters, but I think there's still a lot of question marks as far as rotational pieces and who's going to fill in what. So at that time, about 6 months ago, we suggested that Dajuan Harris, Grady Dick, Kevin McCullough, Jalen Wilson, and Cam Martin would be your initial starting five to start the season. And for the most part, that was close. If you watched the exhibition game the other night, Harris and McCullough and Wilson were for sure starters. Grady Dick actually came off the bench, and I really think that was just Bill Self trolling everybody because everyone thought Grady Dick would be the starter. I think that was just his way of saying, watch, I'll do whatever I want. So his first starting lineup for the exhibition was the same as that. He had Harris, McCullough, Jalen Wilson, but then he went defense and length with KJ Adams at the 4 and Ernest Uday at the 5. A little surprised there. I don't think I was surprised to see KJ in the lineup, but I think I was surprised to see both KJ and Uday, since neither one are really big offensively right now. I don't project that to be the starting lineup tonight. I think it's going to be Dajuan Harris, Grady Dick, Kevin McCullough, Jalen Wilson, and KJ at the 5 again, just because I think we trust KJ defensively. Other difference from 6 months ago versus now, Cam Martin is currently recovering from a shoulder injury, so he is out right now. So that's the reason why you don't see him in our lineup. I think if he was healthy, again, he was our projection to be the first 5-man in the starting lineup. But again, I think this 5 position is going to be something that changes throughout the season quite a bit. You've got about 6 guys that could play that role. So determining who's going to be that starting 5th man is probably the biggest question in the lineups going throughout the year, but plenty of options. So as we look at the rest of the group, that means off the bench, you got Zach Clements, Bobby Pettiford, MJ Rice, Joe Yesufu, Kyle Cuff, Zuby Ejiofor, all of them. So if I had to guess right now, I'm going to say it's KJ Adams starting at the 5 tonight, and then Uday being the first big off the bench, and then Zach Clements, and then probably Zuby as the 3rd center. Bobby Pettiford's back close to 100%. He looked really good the other night, so I think he's the first guard off the bench for sure. We've already heard that MJ Rice is not going to play tonight. He's suffering through a little bit of I think it's a little bit of a back strain. So he's not going to be playing tonight. We'll have to wait to see his season debut for a later game. But the starters, it's pretty much going to be a lot of Harris, Grady Dick, Kevin McCullough, and Jalen Wilson for sure. Those are the 4 guys that are going to get the most minutes. I'm expecting at least Harris, McCullough, and Wilson to all average north of 30 minutes a game. Grady Dick only played 20 minutes the other night, but again, that's an exhibition game. I expect his minutes to go up, especially as good as he looked. But this lineup is really tough to figure out. I mean, I've listened to tons of podcasts, I've listened to tons of KU experts, and no one really has a sure thing of what this lineup's going to look like. It's hard to say what is going to happen because history tells us that Bill Self runs a rotation of 8 men or less, and he's never really gone away from that. Could this be the first year he does go away from that since he's got such a deep roster? I don't know. I think as it comes to crunch time in big important games, you're going to see that lineup dwindle down. So let's kind of run through it. You've got 200 minutes a game to project out, and there's just a lot of question marks of who's going to go where. So again, I think your three upperclassmen guards, DeJuan Harris, Jalen Wilson, and Kevin McCullough, are all going to average north of 30. I think whoever the starting five-man is probably going to average 15 minutes or less. There's going to be a lot of rotational pieces there. I think you'll see stretches where Uday's out there when they want to run and gun. I think when they want to slow it down, you'll see Zuby in there because he's a little bit more of a back down Punisher type guy. I think when we want to run the pick and pop, you'll see a lot of Cam Martin or Zach Clements. The big question for me at the five-man is who lines up the best offensively with the best offensive unit, and can they also hold their own defensively? I think that's the biggest question mark, is all four of these guys, 4 or 5 guys that could play the 5 spot, how good defensively are they? None of them are as good as KJ Adams, which is why I think Adams gets the start early on in the season at the 5. But Bill Self demands you be a good defensive player, especially in the paint. So whichever guy shows the best defensively, I think is the one that ends up with the most minutes. Throughout the year, I do think Uday is the guy that ends up taking most of those, which is kind of disappointing because Zach Clements is supposed to be that guy. He's got the offensive talent to score 12 to 15 a night, but defensively he struggled a little bit. He's not quite as quick with that long, tall body. And I think Bill Self's kind of mentioned it several times in press conferences that no one has really put their foot forward at that 5 spot. It's kind of all even keeled right now. So we may see a lot of different lineups early on until we find that guy who can play the 5 spot that kind of molds his own role. As we look at the guards, we got Bobby Pettiford and Joe Yesufu are going to get the most minutes at the guard spot off the bench. The way Bobby played the other night, he's going to be averaging close to 12 to 15 minutes, I think. Good compliment to DeJuan Harris. Plays well up tempo. Not quite as strong defensively as Harris, but he has a motor and he loves to work hard. So I think he has a given spot on this team. Joe Yesufu is the interesting one to me. He's probably not going to play point guard minutes as much. He's probably going to be that 2 guard. And Bill Self has said that this year, he wants his focus for Yesufu to be scoring. When you're on the court, his plan is for you to go score, and that's kind of what Yesufu's skill set is lined up for. He's not a ball handler. He's not a game manager. He's a guy who can get to the bucket, can get open shots and score. So, not quite sure how that's going to pan out. I think if we're struggling to shoot, maybe Yesufu gets a few more minutes there. But he's going to have to work really hard to earn his minutes because as we move into the season, I think Bill's just going to trust what he knows, and that's going to be Harris, McCullough, and Wilson playing close to 35 minutes a night and hoping that Grady Dick is consistent enough defensively to hone down on that 2 and 3 spot. And then once he gets healthy, I think we'll see a decent amount of MJ Rice. Again, the big question there is how will he look defensively? Super athletic. Not a consistent shooter. He definitely has some development to go through, but he has potential. And when you're that athletic, the sky's the limit. Bill Self has said oftentimes that he reminds him of a young Wayne Selden. And, Selden had some of his struggles his freshman season, but that physical athletic body really paid off. And as he develops, he turned into quite a solid guy by year 3. Other question marks at the end of the rotation, I got Kyle Cuff and Zuby on here at the kind of 12th and 13th man. Again, those are 2 guys that are going to have to fight really hard for minutes. Kyle Cuff is most likely the odd man out to me every game, is not getting playing time unless we're up big. Even though he's not a walk-on, he hasn't really shown enough or been given enough of an opportunity to showcase what he can do. So I think he's one that's going to have to fight really hard for extra minutes, especially on the defensive side. If he can do enough there defensively, he'll get some playing time. And then Zuby might have the highest ceiling, or might be the most ready big man on the team right now as far as a paint scorer. But again, question marks there with him defensively. What can he do? He's still so young and new to the game that there's a lot to be developed. So that's kind of your rotation. Bill Self has also mentioned at the last press conference that he would not be surprised if there's games where we see a few more minutes of Michael Jankovic off the bench. He said Jankovic is by far the best shooter on the team, kind of like a Chris Tien from last year, where we desperately need to bring him in to get a bucket. So we could see a few minutes of him where they try to spot him up and get a couple open shots if we're struggling to shoot. And that's really the biggest question mark with this team in general this year as we look at the season outlook. Who's going to be the guy to knock down a bucket when we need one from the three? Just based on the game the other night in the exhibition game, that was Grady Dick. He went 7 to 9 from the floor, hit a couple big threes, has a really good shooting touch, really great form. And that could be him, but we can't just rely on a freshman to be that guy. So who else on the team can step up? McCullough's never been a tremendous three-point shooter, but if he can average close to 30%, and then if Jalen Wilson can push above 30%, get closer to 32, 34, 35, somewhere in there, that'll help out. It is clear, though, based on the other night, that Jalen is the guy. He scored 23 points in less than 25 minutes, I think. Pretty efficient from the floor, was super aggressive, attacking the paint, getting to the rim, getting in the middle of the defense and getting to the foul line. So it's pretty clear to me that he's probably going to be the leading scorer and be that go-to guy when we need a bucket. Might be different than from years past, like a Frank Mason or Devontae Graham, where that go-to guy was your point guard coming off a pick and roll. It could be Jalen in the ISO. It could be Jalen in a high post working to the paint. But it sounds like he's going to be the guy that gets the primary first look to score on the offensive side. And then I think by the end of the season, Grady Dick will be that second guy where he's just so athletic, long, 6'7", 6'8" from the guard position that he can get open, he can create in space, he can get a shot off over anybody. So I think those are the two guys to get the most look offensively. Outside of that, it's a lot of guys that aren't good shooters. Guys that can fill in the space, athletic, rim runners, but no, none of them are really true shooters. So it's going to be interesting to watch this team this year. I think it'll be potentially one of Bill Self's best coaching years because he has to coach it up better. This is not your typical Kansas team that's got 3 or 4 guys that could shoot. Even if they're not all 40% three-point shooters, you've got multiple options. This is a team where you really don't have multiple options at the three. So how's that going to look offensively? That'll be interesting. This might be a team that takes a few weeks to really develop a true identity. I was talking with Spencer about this the other night during the exhibition game that the struggles early on, were clear that this team doesn't really know its direction yet. But as they got going and picked up the pace, they started putting things together. So I think this team has potential to be a good run and gun team, play up tempo, play fast, get out in transition. They've got a lot of athletic guys that can go up for alley-oops and take the ball in a fast break. So I think that's where I'm looking to see the offense go. Can they keep the tempo up pace? Can they attack the paint, get to the bucket, get to the foul line, and then kind of find space for Grady Dick to get open? One thing I am hoping to see as the season progresses is how we utilize those bigs in the paint. They've got so many options. A couple of them can shoot. A couple of them are bigger and can back down the paint. But I'm really curious to see how Bill Self coaches this group of big men this year. This is, again, probably one of the first years where we don't have that typical 5-man, an Azubuike, even a Dedrick Lawson, a David McCormick from the last couple of years. We don't have that typical 5-man that you're consistent. I'm going to get touches. I'm going to get 15, 20 touches a night in the paint. So who is going to rise from the top of that? Again, I think early on, Ernest Uday has some great potential. He's big. He's athletic. He can run the floor really well. Decent defensively, has some work there. He's kind of slow with his footwork. But again, he's a freshman. He's got plenty to learn. But he looked pretty good in transition with the team. Caught a couple alley-oops. Big athletic guy. I think he's got the biggest ceiling for this year's team. But then there's Zach Clements too, 6'10", 6'11", can shoot from anywhere on the floor. Not the best defensively, but he had a couple moments in the game the other night that looked pretty decent. So again, this is so hard to predict, guys, this 5 spot. Whoever ends up taking that spot, I think, is going to get a lot of trust from Self, but it's going to have to be someone that can handle it defensively on the other end of the floor. So I don't know what that's going to look like. It may take us a few weeks to really see how that comes together, and it may not even come together until after Cam Martin gets back. Maybe Cam ends up being that guy that takes the 5 spot. But a lot of question marks there. As we look through the rest of the season, want to get some season projections here. Um, Let me flip over to my other list here. Currently, KU, depending on where you look, several polls have Baylor finishing as the top team in the Big 12. Some of them have KU tied with Baylor. I don't think this is any different than any other year. As fans, we should expect KU to win the Big 12. We should expect them to finish first. We should expect them to be a top 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, and they should get at least to the second weekend, if not to the Elite Eight, Sweet 16. But the Big 12's pretty deep this year. Baylor is questionably the best team in the league next to Kansas. Texas has a really good team. A couple of their guys back from last year and a couple good transfers. TCU's kind of sneakishly making their way up there. Jamie Dixon's had a heck of a coaching job the last couple of years, and they're finally getting some recruits in there. Oklahoma State still is always a tough play. Texas Tech, incredibly well coached by Mark Adams, and they've got a couple of guys back. So, and then even Oklahoma, they're looking good too. So this is the league that's probably 7 to 8 deep. K-State's projected to finish last, but with Jerome Tang, they've got a lot of excitement this year, so they could make some noise. But I still expect KU to finish first in the Big 12. I could see a scenario where Baylor wins it. They're pretty deep as well, and they've got probably a better scoring team than us. But KU should be the best defensive team in this league by far, if not next to Texas Tech. Texas Tech's always solid defensively, but I think KU has the potential to be one of the best defensive teams we've had in a while, just because they're so long, they're athletic. Not only do you have DeJuan Harris back from last year, you bring over Kevin McCullough from Texas Tech, who is a defensive specialist. You got two guys right there that can lock down on the wing. McCullough can play a little bit of that 4 spot too. I think Jalen's improved defensively as well. It's just that 5 spot. That's the big question mark this year. When KJ Adams is on the floor, you've probably got your best defensive team. That guy can guard 1 through 5 easily. He doesn't have the height for the 5 spot, but he's got the size and the strength and the skill set to match up with anybody. So I think KU should finish very high on the defensive ratings. This should be a team that, if their offensive isn't clicking the way they need to, they might be winning games, 65 to 59. It might be lower scoring. But I do expect them to be one of the best defensive teams, not just in the Big 12, but in the league in general. Looking bigger picture, again, most projections, they have KU losing on the second, not making it to the second weekend, so losing in the first or second round. I could see that for sure as a possibility. The March Madness tournament is such a crapshoot every year that all it takes is one team to get hot and the other to go cold. And KU is known to go cold in some of those low-key games anyway. But I do think there's a good chance for KU to finish Sweet 16, Elite 8. Not quite sure if this is the Final Four team in this year. I think there's just too many question marks offensively right now to really give a good answer on that. But again, they've got the whole season to show what they can do. And I think by the end of the season, like any Bill Self-coach team, the team that we see in February and March is definitely not the team we see November, December, January. So this team has a lot of potential to grow and develop throughout the year, and that's what I'm really looking forward to watching and getting excited about. A couple other final thoughts, a couple projections as far as guys that I think will surprise us this year. I really do think Grady Dick is going to surprise us a ton, and he's probably going to be a one and done guy and could lead the team in scoring or right behind Jalen. He could easily average north of 15 points a game and have one of the better freshman seasons we've seen in the last 10, 15 years. I think DeJuan Harris is very underrated nationally. I think he's one that ends up on the first team all defense for the league and the Big 12. I don't know what it is nationally that they don't like about this guy, but he proved in the national championship that he can guard any guard on the court, and he's one of the best on-ball defenders in the nation. So I think he's going to surprise a lot of people this year, and he might honestly get a few more looks offensively in the pick-and-roll game, and he can attack the basket pretty well and get some nice angles to flip it up there. So I think he's going to have a tremendous year. Kevin McCullough is the one that I have zero confidence in right now because I have no clue what he can be. I know what his floor is. I think his floor is 7 to 10 points a game, solid defense, but I don't know what his ceiling is. So that's where I'm a little up in the air on with him. Is he going to look to score more this year? Is KU going to make him a part of their offense, or are they going to kind of just let him do what he does, and when he gets open looks, he takes them. So he's the real question mark offensively in the lineup. That we'll see how that plays out the next couple games. But Jalen Wilson is primed to have a big season. He's got to have a big year if he wants to go pro. This is the second year in a row he's pulled his name out of the draft because teams have told him he's not quite ready. So I'm looking forward to him having a huge season. Should finish Big 12 first team. He's a National Player of the Year candidate. He needs to average north of 16 points a game. He needs to average close to 16 to 18, 8 to 10 rebounds, shoot 35% plus from the three, and prove that he can be a go-to guy when we're desperate for a bucket. And I think he's in the prime spot to do just that. And then the last guy that I'm pretty excited to watch again is Bobby Pettiford. Kind of mentioned a couple times throughout this episode, but he is quick. Everyone's been saying he's the next Frank Mason. He's very quick, good with his hands. Not a tremendous scorer or shooter, but he can attack the paint and get to the bucket when he needs to. Fantastic in transition. And if he's playing like he did the other night defensively and being that kind of aggressive on-ball defender, I think that'll really raise his ceiling. So I'm excited to see how he does and to see if he is a part of this offense moving forward. So again, tonight is the first game of the season. KU opens up against Nebraska Omaha at the Fieldhouse, and from there the season is on. We got Duke coming up soon in the Champions Classic, and then that battle for Atlantis, and then the season's full blown from there. Big games throughout the season. You still got Kentucky again, you got Missouri again down the road. So a lot of big games on the slate this year for KU. And then, of course, you got Big 12 play. So it's going to be an exciting season. Might be some growing pains early on. But once we get this ball rolling and KU kind of figures out their identity, I think they'll be right up there as one of the best teams in the country like they usually are. And before we finish out, let's just take a quick look at Jayhawks and the NBA. I don't want to go too much into this other than talk quickly about Christian Braun's hot start to the league. Drafted 20 in the top 25. Wasn't expected to be anything other than a low-end rotational guy, but he's been their sixth man off the bench for the Nuggets right now and getting a lot of minutes. There's been a couple games where he's had the most minutes on the team. He's looked really solid defensively in transition, rebounding. Hasn't had quite a lot of scoring opportunities yet, but he's earning the trust of his coaching staff and his teammates, and he's looking really solid in the minutes he's given. So I'm excited for CB. Wish him the best of luck. Och off to a slow start. It's kind of disappointing there. Gets drafted to the Cavs, which I thought would be a great spot for him. And of course, they make the trade for Donovan Mitchell, and now he's in Utah. Well, Utah was supposed to be bad, and now they're actually good, which is why I don't think Och is playing much because he's probably 9th or 10th on the list on their roster right now. He's had a couple games to kind of get some game action in, but really hasn't had a chance to showcase what he can do yet. So I'm hoping we see some more of that throughout the season, and as well as Udoka. Udoka's kind of that first big off the bench, second big off the bench. I think the Jazz are probably going to come back down throughout the season, so we'll see those two play a lot. But they're off to a hot start at 7-3. So until they make some more trades, it might be a while till we see Ochai have a good run. But rest of the NBA, Joel Embiid's going to be an MVP candidate. Andrew Wiggins coming off a big contract extension. Kelly Oubre's in a good spot right now with the Hornets. Devontae Graham is one I hope gets moved because I don't think his role is very good with the Pelicans. Doesn't really get an opportunity to play a whole lot. It's not a big part of the offense. Hope to see him elsewhere soon, as long as it's not the freaking Sacramento Kings, because everyone goes there to die if you're a former KU player. But the season is young. A lot of exciting things coming up there. That'll kind of wrap us up on this episode. A couple things. We're hoping to have a couple more out this week. We'll talk Wednesday about KU football. I'll be back on with Tyler for that. Getting excited for the bowl eligibility. We'll kind of lay out some scenarios there. And then, like I said, hopefully by then or the episode after that, we'll be ready to fully launch all of our new marketing materials and the rebrand with the new name and new logo, which I'm excited to share. So stay in touch. Stay tuned. Make sure you're following us right now on Twitter at The Sports A Gurus. Follow us on Facebook at The Sports Authority Gurus. We're working on Instagram and getting some other things up and going with the rebrand. So if you haven't done so yet, please follow us to stay up to date with all those changes. And I look forward to talking more with you guys this week. Rock Chalk.